I was 11 years old when this happened, and I lived with my mother in a single-story house in a very quiet suburb. It was one of those streets where everyone knows each other by name and almost nothing out of the ordinary ever happens. That day, I left school at the usual time and went straight home, as I did almost every day. My mother worked as a nurse and had told me she would be doing an extra shift at the hospital, so I would be alone until early evening. That had happened before, and I felt fine about it. The house was small and well lit during the day, and I always locked the front door as soon as I got home. I arrived, dropped my backpack on the couch, and went straight to turn on the video game in the living room. The back door was in the kitchen and led to a small yard surrounded by a wooden fence. It was usually always locked, and I almost never paid attention to it. While I was playing, I could hear only the sound of the game and, every now and then, a car passing on the street. At some point, I thought I heard a different noise, but I ignored it. A few seconds later, I clearly heard the handle of the back door slowly turning. It wasn't a hard pull. It was slow and careful, as if someone were testing it without wanting to make noise. The handle stopped, stayed still for a moment that was too long, and then turned again, a little more firmly. My stomach tightened immediately. I stayed frozen on the couch, controller in my hand, trying to decide whether I had really heard that. The first thing I thought was that it might have been the wind, even though I knew there was practically no wind that day. The house was far too quiet for that kind of mistake. The game kept running on the screen, but I wasn't paying attention to anything anymore. I listened, my heart pounding fast, waiting for the sound to happen again. A few seconds later, I heard it again. The handle turned a little, stopped, and then turned once more, at exactly the same rhythm as before. It didn't sound like someone trying to force their way in. It sounded like someone curious and patient, testing limits. I slowly stood up from the couch and went into the hallway, trying not to make noise on the floor. I stopped before the kitchen and just listened. The sound didn't come again, but I was sure I hadn't imagined it. I thought about calling my mother, but I remembered she was at work and would probably tell me to lock everything and hide. The idea of going up to the door to check made a chill run through my whole body. I didn't want to get close to that handle. That's when I decided to go into the bathroom connected to my bedroom, which had a lock. I took my phone with me and closed the door slowly, sitting on the floor with my back against it, trying to breathe without making any noise. I sat there staring at the bathroom door, waiting to hear any other sound from the house. The bathroom had a small, high window that let in weak, late-afternoon light, giving everything a bluish tone. I could hear my own heart beating far too loudly. For a few seconds, everything was silent, and part of me started to think maybe I had overreacted. That was when I heard a low click coming from the kitchen. It wasn't the door opening all the way. It was the clear sound of the lock being messed with, followed by a short creak, as if someone had pushed the door just a little and then stopped. My entire body tensed up. I gripped my phone tightly and thought about calling my mother, but I was afraid of speaking too loudly. I kept listening. I heard light footsteps, not rushed, like someone walking carefully inside the kitchen. They weren't heavy steps or running. It was the kind of sound you make when you don't want to be heard. I held my breath and pressed my back harder against the bathroom door, as if that could stop someone from coming into the bedroom. The silence returned soon after, but this time it felt worse, as if someone had stopped and was listening too. I started counting the seconds, trying to remember whether I had locked the back door when I got home from school. I always locked it, but that day I couldn't be sure. The doubt started to scare me more than the sounds themselves. From the bathroom, I could hear the refrigerator making a soft click and the hum of the kitchen clock, but no clear sound of someone leaving. At some point, I heard something that made me freeze completely. The sound of fingers touching a smooth surface, followed by a short dragging noise, like someone resting a hand on the wall or the counter. It didn't sound accidental. It sounded like someone steadying themselves. That was when I called my mother. I spoke softly, almost whispering, saying that I had heard someone messing with the back door. She became serious immediately and told me to stay locked in the bathroom and not come out for any reason. She said she was trying to leave the hospital as quickly as possible, and that if I heard anything different, I should call the police. While I was talking to her, I heard one last sound coming from the kitchen closer to the back door. A light creak, like the door being opened a little more, and then total silence. I didn't hear footsteps going away or the door slamming shut, just that heavy silence that seemed to fill the entire house. I stayed in the bathroom with the phone to my ear, listening to my mother ask me to respond every so often just to know I was still there. Time felt like it wasn't moving. The bathroom light started to bother me, but I didn't have the courage to turn it off. At one point, I heard a very faint noise near the back door, like something being lightly touched and then released. It wasn't loud enough to be certain, but it was real enough to make me hold back tears. I kept thinking that if the person was inside the house, they could hear any sound I made. After that, I didn't hear anything else for a stretch of time that felt far too long to be comfortable. No footsteps, no creaking, nothing. The silence became heavy, as if someone had decided not to move anymore. My mother said she was on her way and would be there soon. I stared at the gap under the bathroom door, waiting to see a shadow pass by. Nothing did. Even so, I didn't move. I only managed to breathe a little easier when I heard my mother's car pulling into the driveway. When I heard the front door open and my mother's voice calling my name, I took a few seconds before unlocking the bathroom. My legs felt weak, and I walked out slowly, as if I was still afraid someone might be there. My mother went straight to the kitchen without even taking off her coat. The back door was unlocked, not wide open, but clearly not latched. She ran her hand over the handle and stayed silent for a moment. There were visible marks of dirty fingers right around the handle, as if someone had held it firmly enough to leave traces. They weren't old marks. They looked recent, still slightly smudged. She hugged me tightly and called the police anyway. While we waited, I sat on the couch looking toward the kitchen, trying to understand when the door had been unlocked. I didn't remember going there at any point after getting home from school. When the officers arrived, they checked the yard, the fence, and the door, but they didn't find anyone. They said the person had probably left when they realized the house wasn't empty, or that someone would arrive soon. That night I stayed awake for a long time, thinking about how carefully the handle had been turned. It wasn't someone trying to break in. It was someone testing, patiently, waiting for the right moment. Story 2. I was 10 years old when this happened, and I lived with my parents and my younger brother in a small town, the kind where everyone thinks nothing bad ever happens. That day, my father went out quickly to pick up my brother from school, which was only a few minutes away by car. He said he would be right back and left me home alone for about 30 minutes. I had been alone before for short periods, so I didn't think it was strange. It was mid-afternoon, still daylight, and the street was quiet, with a few houses open and only a few cars passing by. I was in the living room watching TV, sitting on the floor near the front window. At some point, I heard someone call my name. At first, I thought it was my imagination or a neighbor talking to someone else. I ignored it. A few seconds later, I heard it again, louder and closer. It was a woman's voice coming from the street right in front of my house. She said my name clearly, the way adults call when they want a child to come outside. My heart started racing immediately, because I didn't remember telling my name to anyone that day. I stood up slowly and moved closer to the window without opening the curtain all the way. I looked through a small gap in the curtain and saw a woman standing on the sidewalk near the gate. She wasn't in a hurry. She was looking at the house as if she were sure I was inside. She called my name again and said that my mother had asked her to come get me, that I needed to go with her now. The way she spoke sounded rehearsed, far too calm. My mother would never send someone to get me without telling me first, and that thought flashed through my mind right away. Even so, I froze for a few seconds trying to understand how that woman knew my name. She took a few steps closer to the gate and kept talking, saying my father was running late and that it would be better if I came out right away. I stepped back from the window and felt a chill run up my spine. The TV was still on, but I could barely hear it. My first instinct was to run to my bedroom and hide. I grabbed the house phone and went to the bathroom, locking the door. From there, I could still hear her voice, now lower, calling my name again as if she were trying not to draw the neighbor's attention. My hands were shaking as I called my father. He answered quickly, and I started crying while I spoke, telling him there was a woman outside calling my name and saying my mom had sent her to get me. His tone changed immediately. He told me not to go near the windows and to stay locked in somewhere in the house until he got back. While I was talking to him, I heard the woman change her tone. She wasn't raising her voice anymore. She called my name in an almost overly calm way, repeating that she was there to help and that I didn't need to be afraid. That made my stomach tighten because it felt like she knew I was listening. I stayed sitting on the bathroom floor with the phone to my ear, trying not to make any noise. After a few minutes, I heard footsteps on the sidewalk and the sound of the gate being touched. It wasn't a hard pull. It sounded like someone testing it. Right after that, silence. I didn't hear the woman leave and I didn't hear a car start. Just that strange silence that happens when something suddenly changes. My father said he was almost there and that I was doing the right thing. I stayed where I was, counting the seconds, afraid she would call my name again. After a while, I worked up the courage to look through the small gap in the bathroom window that faced the side of the house. I didn't see the woman there, but that didn't calm me down. It felt like she could be anywhere outside my line of sight. The street looked too normal, as if nothing had happened. Even so, I didn't leave the bathroom. I listened for every sound, trying to pick out footsteps, voices, anything unusual. The house felt bigger in that moment, full of places where someone could hide without being seen. A few minutes later, I heard a car stop on the street. I held my breath, not knowing if it was my father or someone else. I only relaxed a little when I heard his voice outside calling my name. I waited for him to knock on the door and only then unlocked the bathroom. I ran into the living room and clung to him. He looked around the house, opened the gate, and went out to the sidewalk, but there was no one there. The woman had simply vanished, as if she had never been there calling my name. My father came back inside with me and locked the front door immediately. He tried to calm me down, asking exactly what the woman had said and what she looked like. I told him everything as best I could, still shaking, saying that she knew my name and claimed my mother had sent her. He became serious and went back outside to talk to some neighbors. I stayed in the living room, sitting on the couch, listening to muffled voices outside. Within a few minutes, 2 neighbors said they had seen a woman walking slowly down the street, stopping in front of our house, and then continuing toward the corner. No one knew who she was. Later, when my mother got home, we told the whole story again. She was frightened that someone knew my name and our routine. She explained that I had done exactly the right thing by not responding and by hiding. Even so, that night I couldn't sleep properly. Every noise from the street made me sit up in bed. What bothered me most wasn't just the woman's lie, but how calmly she spoke, as if she were sure I would open the door at some point. After that, my father stayed home the rest of the night, pacing back and forth, checking doors and windows more times than usual. The street looked the same as every other night, but for me, everything felt different. I kept remembering the woman's voice calling my name, the way she said my mother had sent her. It hadn't been a shout or a threat. It had been something designed to sound normal, almost safe. That confused me because I had always thought danger was something obvious and loud. This hadn't been anything like that. In the days that followed, my parents informed the school and some neighbors about what had happened. We found out that the same woman had been seen on other streets in the neighborhood, talking to children through gates or calling out names that weren't theirs. No one knew where she had gotten that information. The police were notified, but they never found the woman. Over time, life returned to normal, but I was never left home alone like that again. Even today, when I think back on that afternoon, what scares me most isn't the fact that someone lied to me. It's how convincing it almost felt, and how easily I might have believed her if I hadn't stopped to think for just a few extra seconds. Story 3. I was 12 years old when this happened, and I lived with my parents in a 2-story house in a very typical residential neighborhood. That night was different because my parents had gone out to dinner for the first time in months. They said they wouldn't be gone long and that their phones would be on the whole time. I had stayed home alone at night before, but never for that long. It was cold outside and the house felt bigger and quieter than it did during the day. I stayed in the living room watching TV with all the lights on, trying not to think too much about being alone. After a while, I went upstairs to my bedroom to play on the computer. My parents' bedroom was on the same floor at the end of the hallway. Their door was closed, as it always was at night. I was focused on the game when I heard a sound that made me take off my headset immediately. It was clearly coming from my parents' bedroom. It was the unmistakable sound of a drawer being opened. It wasn't fast or accidental. It was the sound of wood sliding open, stopping, and then another drawer being opened right after. I stayed frozen in my chair, trying to understand if my parents had come back without me hearing them. Even though I knew that didn't make sense, I sat still for a few seconds, listening closely. The computer was still on, but I couldn't focus on anything anymore. The sound came again, closer this time, like someone closing a drawer with too much care. There was no banging, no rush. I slowly stood up and went to my bedroom door, opening it just enough to look into the hallway. The hallway light was off, but I could see faint light from the street coming through the bathroom window at the far end. My parents' bedroom door was slightly open, which wasn't normal. That's when I heard footsteps. They weren't fast or heavy. They were slow, controlled, moving from my parents' bedroom toward the hallway. Each step had a short pause, as if the person was listening before continuing. My heart started pounding and my hands felt cold. I thought about calling my parents, but I knew they weren't there. I thought about running downstairs, but the idea of crossing that hallway froze me in place. I went back into my bedroom and closed the door slowly, trying not to make any noise. I looked around for somewhere to hide and ended up diving under the bed, pulling the blanket with me. I curled up under the bed, my face almost pressed against the cold floor, trying to breathe without making a sound. From there, I could see the gap under my bedroom door and part of the hallway. The silence became heavy for a few seconds, as if the entire house were waiting. That was when I saw a shadow slowly pass across the gap under the door. I didn't clearly see feet, just the light dimming as someone stopped on the other side. My entire body went rigid. I knew it wasn't my imagination because the shadow moved again, back and forth, as if the person were looking into the room. I heard a low sound near the door, like someone touching the doorknob without turning it. There was no attempt to open it. After that, the footsteps slowly moved away down the hallway. The creaking floor made it clear exactly where the person was, heading back toward my parents' bedroom. I stayed there without moving, counting the seconds, waiting to hear their bedroom door close or a window open. Instead, I heard the drawers again, now faster but still careful. It sounded like someone sorting through things, setting items aside, with no hurry at all. I stayed under the bed for what felt like much longer than it really was. My arms started to ache from being curled up like that, but I didn't move. The sound of the drawers stopped suddenly, and the silence returned, heavier than before. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps again, heading toward the hallway for a second time. This time, they stopped right in front of my bedroom. The shadow covered the gap under the door again, but it stayed there longer. I held my breath, afraid that any movement would give away where I was. After that, I heard a different sound farther away. A long creak followed by a soft click, like a window being opened carefully. The sound was clearly coming from my parents' bedroom. Right after, I heard footsteps heading back toward that room again, and then nothing. No door slamming, no footsteps going down the stairs. Just silence. I waited to hear someone leave through the front door, but that never happened. That was when I worked up the courage to grab my phone from my pocket and call my parents, speaking so quietly as I told them there was someone inside the house. My dad answered quickly, and as soon as I heard his voice, I almost started crying. I whispered, saying that someone was in their bedroom going through the drawers. He became serious immediately and told me not to leave where I was for any reason. He said they were already on their way back and that he was calling the police. While I was talking to him, I listened closely for any sound in the house. I didn't hear any more footsteps, drawers, or windows. The silence felt artificial, as if someone had stopped moving on purpose. That scared me even more than the noises before. I stayed hidden under the bed, staring at the gap under the door, waiting for the shadow to appear again. My thoughts raced back and forth, trying to understand why someone would enter the house knowing I might be there. At some point, I heard the distant sound of a car passing on the street, then another. Every noise made my body react as if it were coming from inside the house. I only started to relax a little when I heard sirens in the distance, faint at first, but getting closer. Even then, I didn't move until I heard my father's voice calling my name from the hallway. I crawled out from under the bed slowly, my legs shaking, and opened my bedroom door. My father was in the hallway with 2 police officers, all of them speaking quietly. Several lights were on now, making everything look different, almost too normal. One of the officers asked me to stay near the stairs while they went to my parents' bedroom. I stood there listening to them walk, open things, and talk quietly to each other. A few minutes later, my father came back, his face pale, and said they had found my mother's jewelry laid out on the bed, as if someone had been deciding what to take. The officer showed him that the window in my parents' bedroom was open. Not broken, just open, as if someone had carefully unlocked it and climbed out that way. The cold night air was coming into the room, lightly moving the curtain. They said the person had probably fled when they heard movement outside or realized they weren't completely alone. That sent a strong chill through me, because it meant that at some point, someone had been there knowing I was in the house. Maybe they had heard my footsteps, the game, or had simply assumed someone was home. Even so, they kept going through the drawers calmly. After the police finished their inspection, the house felt strangely quiet. My parents tried to talk to me calmly, but it was clear they were shaken. My mother went into the bedroom and began gathering her jewelry from the bed with trembling hands, as if she was only then processing what had happened. I stood in the doorway, staring at the open window, trying to imagine when that person had come in. I kept thinking about the slow footsteps in the hallway and the shadow stopped in front of my bedroom door. The idea that someone had been that close while I was hiding still made me feel nauseous. That night, no one slept well. I stayed in my parents' room on a mattress on the floor, and every creak of the house made me sit up instantly. My father locked all the windows and doors more than once, even after the police assured us everything was secure. In the days that followed, I noticed my parents changed small habits, like always going out together and never leaving me alone at night again. To this day, when I think back on that night, what scares me most isn't the burglary itself. It's the calmness of someone opening drawers, walking slowly down the hallway, and stopping at my bedroom door, knowing I was there and continuing anyway. Story 4. I was 9 years old when this happened, and I lived with my mother in an old 2-story building, the kind built decades ago that always makes noise. It was an ordinary weekday afternoon, and my mother had gone out to take care of work-related errands. I would be alone for a few hours, which had happened before. The building had a constant smell of old wood and dust, and the sound of any footsteps echoed easily. I stayed in the living room watching TV, with the apartment door closed and the windows open because of the heat. After a while, I heard a cough coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was a neighbor from the floor above because the sound was muffled, as if it were passing through the ceiling. I kept watching TV, but the cough came back. It was always the same dry, short cough, repeated at regular intervals. I started paying more attention when I realized that between one cough and another, I could hear light footsteps, like someone walking from one room to another upstairs. That confused me, because the apartment above ours had been empty for months waiting for renovation. I sat on the couch for a few minutes trying to remember if someone had moved in there without me knowing. My mother always mentioned it when a new neighbor showed up, and I didn't remember anything like that. The coughing continued, always in the same tone, neither too loud nor too quiet, as if the person wasn't sick, just making that sound on purpose. The footsteps also continued, moving back and forth, stopping and then starting again. It didn't sound like someone walking normally. It sounded like someone moving through the rooms without hurry, as if looking for something. Little by little, the feeling of being alone in the apartment began to change. I knew I was alone, but at the same time it felt like there was someone else there, just above me. I turned off the TV to listen more closely. Without the sound on, everything became clearer. The cough came from the side of the bedroom, then the bathroom, then another bedroom, exactly as if someone were moving through all the rooms upstairs. My stomach tightened, and I thought it might be better to call someone. The first person who came to mind was my grandmother, who lived nearby and always answered quickly. I picked up the landline phone in the living room and dialed my grandmother's number. While it was ringing, the coughing stopped for a few seconds, which made me even more nervous. When my grandmother answered, I started talking fast, saying that I was hearing someone coughing upstairs and walking from one room to another. She tried to calm me down, saying that old buildings make noise and that it was probably pipes or wind. While she was talking, I heard the cough again, closer than before, as if the person had stopped directly above the living room. I told her that, and the tone of the conversation changed immediately. My grandmother told me to stay where I was and not go upstairs under any circumstances. She said she would call my mother and that if I heard anything else strange, I should say so right away. I stayed sitting on the couch, holding the phone with both hands, trying not to cry. That was when I heard a sound that couldn't be confused with normal building noise. It came from upstairs, clear and direct. The sound of a toilet being flushed. It wasn't pipes, it wasn't an echo. It was the exact sound of someone using the bathroom above my apartment. My entire body went cold. I stayed silent for a few seconds after hearing the flush, trying to understand what had just happened. My grandmother noticed that I had stopped talking and asked what was wrong. When I told her, she went quiet for a moment that was far too long and then told me to go stand near the apartment door, without opening it, and stay on the line with her. As I got up from the couch, I heard footsteps again upstairs, now closer to the bathroom area. The coughing returned right after, the same dry, repetitive sound as before, as if the person no longer cared about being discreet. I went into the hallway of my apartment and stood there, staring at the front door. The building felt even quieter now, as if all the sound were concentrated on the floor above. I could hear every step, every small creak of the old wood. They weren't running footsteps or hurried ones. They were slow, heavy enough for me to be sure it wasn't my imagination. My grandmother kept talking to me, asking me to respond now and then just to make sure I was okay. I could barely form complete sentences. While I stood near the door, I heard something that made me hold my breath. A creak different from the others, longer, coming from upstairs, like a door being opened slowly. Right after that, footsteps moved to another point on the upper floor, stopped, and then started again toward the center of the apartment. The coughing no longer came along with the footsteps. That gave me the feeling that the person had stopped pretending to be normal. My grandmother noticed my fast breathing over the phone and told me not to leave that spot for any reason, that she had already spoken to my mother and was calling the police. I leaned against the wall, pressing the phone to my ear, trying not to cry. The building made its usual noises, but over them I could clearly hear someone walking. At one point, the footsteps stopped directly above where I was, as if the person had paused at the top of the internal staircase of the upstairs apartment. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It felt like someone had stopped to listen. I thought about unlocking the door and running out, but I was afraid of running into someone in the hallway. I stayed there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. After a few minutes, I heard a different sound, more distant, coming from the ceiling. It wasn't footsteps or coughing. It sounded like something being pulled and then pushed carefully, followed by a short creak of old wood. It seemed to come from a spot above the hallway where the building's attic access was located. I didn't know exactly what it was like up there, only that almost no one used that space. The coughing came back one last time, weaker, and then stopped completely. My grandmother stayed silent on the other end of the line, as if she were listening too. Shortly after, I heard voices in the building's hallway and hurried footsteps climbing the stairs. The police had arrived. My grandmother told me to unlock the door only when someone identified themselves. I did, my hand shaking. 2 police officers entered the apartment and asked me to stay near the door while they listened to what I had to say. I told them about the coughing, the footsteps, and the flush. They exchanged a quick look and went to check the upper floor. A few minutes later, one of them came back and said the attic door was open. Not broken, just open, as if someone had passed through there shortly before. The officers went upstairs with me as far as the stairwell entrance of the building, but they didn't let me go any farther. I stood in the hallway on my floor, listening to them move around upstairs, opening doors, speaking quietly to each other. One of them commented that the apartment above was empty, with no furniture, just as my mother had said. The bathroom showed no signs of recent use, but the attic access was open, with the folding ladder partially pulled down, as if someone had just gone up or come down. That explained the sounds moving back and forth, but it didn't make anything easier to accept. When my mother arrived, I was already sitting on the couch with a blanket around my shoulders, even though it wasn't cold. The officers explained that someone had probably entered the building and used the attic as a temporary hiding place. They said people like that sometimes hide in high places because they know almost no one looks up. The coughing might have been nervousness or an attempt to disguise their presence as a normal building noise. My mother hugged me tightly, apologizing for leaving me alone. I couldn't cry. I just kept thinking about the sound of the toilet flushing and how specific it had been, far too specific to be anything else. In the days that followed, the building became busier. Management had the attic access locked and the locks changed. Even so, every time I was alone, I paid attention to any noise coming from above. To this day, when I hear someone coughing on another floor, my body reacts before my mind does. I remember that afternoon, the coughing moving from room to room, and the certainty that I wasn't alone, even though I thought I was. What scares me most isn't that someone was up there. It's that I heard everything happen step by step without being able to do anything except wait. Story 5. I was 13 years old when this happened, and I lived with my mother in a simple house in an ordinary residential neighborhood. That night, she was working late and told me she wouldn't be back until after midnight. I had stayed home alone at night before, so I tried to act like it was something normal. I had dinner early, locked the front door, and went to my bedroom, which was at the end of the hallway. It was cold outside, and the house felt quieter than it did during the day. I left the hallway light on because I didn't like everything being dark. I was lying on my bed using my phone when, without any warning, the hallway light went out. It didn't flicker or fade first, it just went out. I watched the strip of light under my bedroom door disappear all at once. I thought it might have been a power outage, but my phone charger was still working. That confused me and made me a little nervous. I got up slowly, went to my bedroom door, and opened it just enough to reach the hallway light switch. When I turned the light back on, I saw something that made my entire body freeze. A shadow standing exactly outside my door, as if someone were there, motionless, waiting for me to open it. I stood there with my hand still on the switch, unable to move. The shadow didn't move, didn't come closer or step back. It was just the silhouette of someone standing very close to the door, tall enough to cover a large part of the hallway wall. I couldn't see a face or clothes, just the dark outline against the light. My first thought was that my mother had come home early, but that didn't make sense. She always made noise when she came in, talking loudly, turning on the TV, deliberately making sounds so I would know it was her. That shadow was far too quiet. I closed my bedroom door slowly without making any noise, my heart pounding so hard I thought it could be heard outside. I took a few steps back and stood in the middle of the room, trying to think about what to do. The house was completely silent now. I didn't hear footsteps, I didn't hear breathing, nothing. That scared me even more because it meant the person knew how to stay still. I looked around for somewhere to hide and remembered the closet next to the bathroom. I opened the door quickly and went inside, pulling the clothes forward and closing it as much as I could. I crouched inside the closet with my back against the cold wall, trying to control my breathing. The smell of stored clothes made me want to cough, but I held it in. Through the gap in the door, I could see a strip of light from the bedroom. A few seconds passed with no sound, and part of me started to think maybe I had imagined the shadow. That's when I heard a low noise coming from the hallway, like a foot dragging slowly across the floor. It wasn't hurried. It was someone approaching carefully, stopping, then moving forward a little more. The sound stopped right in front of my bedroom door. I stayed perfectly still, staring at the gap in the closet as if I could see something from there. The silence lasted too long. Then I heard the bedroom doorknob being touched. It wasn't turned all at once. First there was a light click as if someone were testing it, then slow pressure. The door didn't open yet, but I was certain someone was on the other side. With trembling hands, I pulled my phone from my pocket and sent a quick message to my mother, saying there was someone in the house. I stayed there in the closet, phone in hand, waiting for any response. My mother took a few seconds to reply, and those seconds felt much longer than they really were. Meanwhile, the doorknob moved again, this time more firmly. The bedroom door began to open slowly, making that low creaking sound old doors make when they haven't been opened in a while. Through the gap in the closet, I saw the hallway light spill a little into the room. The person didn't come in all at once. They stopped with the door half open as if looking around, assessing the space before taking the next step. I held my breath, afraid that any sound would give me away. My entire body was tense, aching from being curled up for so long. I heard one step inside the room, then another, slow, heavy. The person seemed to be walking carefully as if they didn't want to bump into anything. My phone vibrated in my hand with my mother's reply saying she had already called the police and was on her way. I almost cried with relief, but I stayed quiet. A few seconds later, I heard a quick noise in the hallway like someone suddenly turning around, followed by hurried footsteps moving away. The bedroom door stayed open, gently swaying in place. I remained in the closet without moving, trying to understand whether the person had really left or had just moved to another part of the house. The silence that followed the hurried footsteps felt different, less heavy, but still frightening. I waited to hear the front door open or slam shut, but that didn't happen. Everything became too quiet. I could hear only my own heart and the low hum of the bedroom light. I didn't have the courage to leave my hiding place. The idea of looking out and finding someone still there left me paralyzed. A few minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance. The sound grew louder little by little, and only then did I feel my legs start to relax slightly. I stayed inside the closet until I heard loud knocks on the front door and a voice identifying themselves as police. Even then, I hesitated to come out. When I finally opened the closet door, the bedroom looked exactly as I had left it, except for the open door and the hallway light on. I stepped out slowly and went to the living room, where two police officers were already speaking through the hallway. They entered carefully, asking where I was and if anyone else was in the house. I told them everything as best I could, still shaking, describing the hallway light going out, the shadow standing outside my door, and the doorknob turning slowly. They did a quick sweep of the rooms, checked windows, doors, and the backyard. One of the windows was unlocked, open just enough for someone to pass through without making noise. Nothing was broken. That made it clear the person hadn't needed to force anything to get inside. They said the intruder had probably fled when they heard the sirens approaching. My mother arrived shortly after, pale and unable to speak properly at first. She hugged me tightly, as if she was afraid to let go. The officers explained the situation to her and said they would file a report, but that they were unlikely to find anyone that night. After they left, the house felt different. The hallway especially felt narrower and darker, even with the light on. That night, I slept in my mother's room with the door locked and the light on. To this day, what bothers me most isn't the shadow itself, but the fact that it stood there, right outside my door, as if deciding whether to come in or not. Story 6. I was 12 years old when this happened, and I lived with my parents in a single-story house in a typical residential neighborhood. It was summer, school vacation time, and that day I would be home alone during the afternoon while my parents were at work. They left early and didn't come back until early evening. I was already used to that. The house was small and easy to manage, and I always kept everything locked. That day was hot and humid, and all the windows were open to let in a bit of breeze. I was in my bedroom, sitting on the bed, watching videos on my phone. My bedroom was on the side of the house with a window that opened directly onto the side yard, separated from the neighbor's house by a low fence. At some point, I heard a dull sound coming from the window, like someone touching the outside wall. At first, I thought it was just a branch hitting something or the wind pushing something loose. I ignored it. A few seconds later, I heard it again, clearer this time, followed by a low voice calling my name. My entire body froze when I recognized the voice. It belonged to a boy from my school, someone I knew only by sight. I slowly got up and moved closer to the window without opening the curtain all the way. He was outside, leaning against the wall, with his hands resting on the window ledge. He looked nervous, glancing around all the time. He called my name again and said he needed to come in quickly to use the phone because his cell phone had stopped working. The way he spoke was hurried but also low, as if he didn't want anyone else to hear. That made me uncomfortable because my parents had always told me not to let anyone in when I was home alone, even if it was someone I knew. I said I couldn't open it and that my parents weren't home. He insisted, saying it would only be for a minute and that no one needed to know. He even smiled in a strange way, trying to seem calm. I took a step back and said I could call someone for him if he wanted, but that I wasn't going to open the window. The smile disappeared immediately. He became serious and placed his hand on the bottom part of the window, pushing lightly as if testing it. The window was locked, but I felt it shift slightly in the frame. My heart started racing. I stood in the middle of the bedroom, not knowing what to do, trying to keep my voice steady as I told him to go away. He pretended not to hear and pushed the window again, this time with more force. The glass trembled slightly, making a dull sound that echoed through the room. It didn't break, but it was enough for me to realize that this was no longer just a request. He was looking straight into the bedroom now without hiding it, as if he were calculating something. The heat that had only been uncomfortable before now felt heavy in the air, and I felt my hands start to sweat. I took a few steps back and grabbed my phone from the bed. I said out loud that I was going to call my parents. He stopped pushing the window for a second and stayed silent, staring at me. Then he tried again, this time fiddling with the bottom part, as if looking for a weaker spot. The sound was different now, more insistent. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my neck. I went to the bedroom door without turning my back on the window and locked the door from the inside. The feeling of being trapped in my own room was frightening. While I typed my mother's number with trembling hands, I heard the sound of a car coming from the street. It wasn't loud, but it was enough for him to hear too. The boy quickly glanced back, then looked at me with an expression that mixed anger and urgency. He suddenly stepped away from the window and ran through the side yard, jumping over the low fence and disappearing from my view. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the open window, trying to understand what had just happened, unable to move. I called my mother right after, crying and explaining everything in a confused way. She told me to lock all the doors and stay somewhere safe until they got home. I did that without thinking twice. I walked through the house, closing windows, checking locks, and looking out at the yard several times. The house felt bigger and quieter now. Every sound made me jump. I sat on the couch, hugging a pillow, waiting to hear my parents' car. When they arrived, I ran to hug them and told everything more calmly. My father went into the yard and looked at my bedroom window. There were dirty fingerprints on the glass and on the frame, as if someone had held on tightly. That made my stomach turn. They called the police, who came to ask some questions and wrote down the boy's name. They said they would look into it, but that he had probably already left some time ago. A few days later, my parents called me in to talk. They had spoken with other parents at the school and found out that the boy had been involved in other problems in the neighborhood. It wasn't the first time he had tried to enter empty houses during the day. Some families had already reported similar incidents. Hearing that gave me a different kind of chill because it meant it hadn't been impulsive. He had done it before, with other people. After that day, I was never home alone again with the windows open. Even in the heat, I preferred to keep everything closed and turn on the fan. Whenever I remember that afternoon, what scares me most isn't that he appeared at the window. It's the way he tried to get in. Testing, insisting, waiting for me to give in. To this day, when someone calls my name from outside the house, my body reacts before my mind does, remembering how easy it is for someone to take advantage of the trust of a child who was just home alone, waiting for their parents to come back. Story 7. I was 10 years old when this happened, and I lived with my father in a single-story house in a quiet residential neighborhood. My mother no longer lived with us at the time, so it was just the two of us. That day, my father went out quickly to go to the grocery store, saying he would be back in less than half an hour. It was raining heavily, with wind and thunder, the kind of storm that makes the house dark even during the afternoon. I stayed alone in the living room watching TV with all the lights on. The rain kept pounding against the windows, and the sound of water running through the gutters was constant. Even so, I felt relatively safe because my father hadn't gone far. I locked the front door as soon as he left, just as he always asked me to do. The house seemed normal, just louder because of the storm. After a few minutes, the doorbell rang. It was a short, normal ring like any visitor. I found it strange because no one usually showed up when it was raining like that. I got up from the couch and went to the front door, looking through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. The porch was empty. Just heavy rain, and the wet ground reflecting the streetlight. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to figure out if someone had rung and run off. I went back to the living room and tried to ignore it. Less than a minute later, the doorbell rang again, this time twice in a row, more insistently. My stomach tightened because it still didn't make sense for someone to ring like that and disappear. I went back to the door and looked through the peephole again more carefully. There was still no one there. The rain kept coming down hard, and the wind made the trees on the street sway, but there was no shadow, no human movement at all. I stood there feeling a strange chill, trying to rationalize it. I thought it could be some electrical issue because of the storm. Maybe the doorbell was malfunctioning. Even so, that explanation didn't fully convince me. I moved my face away from the door and took 2 steps back, feeling my heart beating faster than normal. That's when I heard something different, a dull sound coming from the side of the house. The knocks weren't coming from the front door. They were coming from the side door, the one that led to the laundry room in the backyard. They weren't loud or desperate knocks. They were spaced out and firm, like someone testing, waiting for a reaction. Each knock echoed through the house, mixed with the sound of the rain. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, not knowing where to go, trying to understand if it could be the wind pushing something. But I quickly dismissed that idea. The sound had rhythm. Pause. Another knock. Pause again. It felt like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. My entire body tensed and I felt my hands start to sweat. I stood there for a few seconds, staring toward the hallway that led to the side door. The TV was still on, but I could barely hear it now. The knocking stopped for a moment, and that silence was worse than the noise. I tried to convince myself that it might be some loose object in the yard hitting the house because of the strong wind. I took 2 steps toward the hallway and stopped. Before I got any closer, I heard the knocks again, exactly in the same spot with the same interval between them. That ended any logical explanation I was trying to hold on to. I decided to hide. I ran to the bathroom in my bedroom and locked the door, sitting on the floor with my back pressed against it. The bathroom light was on, but it flickered slightly because of the storm. I grabbed my phone with trembling hands and called my father. When he answered, I started talking fast, saying that the doorbell had rung by itself and that now someone was knocking on the side door. He became serious immediately and told me not to leave where I was for any reason. While I was talking to him, I heard a low sound coming from the kitchen, like wet footsteps slowly moving away. My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. I stayed in the bathroom, gripping the phone tightly, trying to speak quietly while my father told me he was already on his way back. The rain got even heavier at that moment, with thunder loud enough to make the house vibrate slightly. Even so, I could still hear sounds that didn't match the storm. From the hallway came a short creak, like someone touching a door and pulling back. I didn't hear any more knocking, but it felt like someone had changed position, as if they were walking around the house looking for another point of entry. That gave me a strange, cold feeling in my stomach. I stared at the gap under the bathroom door, waiting to see a shadow pass by. The hallway light was off, so I couldn't see much, just darkness shifting when lightning lit up the house for a second. During one of those flashes, I thought I saw something move quickly near the kitchen, but I couldn't be sure. I told my father, and he told me to stay hidden and not hang up. I tried to breathe slowly, but every sound of the rain seemed to hide another sound underneath. Something closer, more human. I stayed there in the bathroom for several minutes, which felt much longer than they really were. The rain didn't let up, and the constant noise made my thoughts race. At times, I thought everything outside had stopped. At others, I was sure someone was still there, just waiting for me to make a mistake. I heard a low sound coming from the kitchen, like something being lightly dragged across the floor. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me hold my breath. I didn't move, not even to switch the phone to my other hand. My father kept talking to me, saying he was almost there and that I was doing everything right. He asked me to describe exactly what I had heard. While I was talking, I heard one last sound coming from the side of the house, like wet footsteps moving away along the outside pavement. It wasn't running. It was slow and controlled, as if the person wasn't in a hurry at all. That scared me more than if someone had run away. Silence returned right after that, heavy and strange, as if the house had suddenly become empty. I stayed completely silent with the phone still pressed to my ear. My father said he was 2 streets away, but I couldn't relax. The house felt different, as if every room was farther away from where I was. The bathroom smelled of cleaning products, and that strong smell mixed with the dampness from the rain made me feel nauseous. I tried to focus on any sound that might indicate someone had come back, but all I could hear was the rain outside and the uneven sound of my own breathing. Even so, I was afraid to leave my hiding place before being absolutely sure. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of my father's car pulling into the driveway. I recognized the engine noise and the specific way he closed the car door. Even then, I didn't leave the bathroom right away. I waited until I heard the key in the front door and his voice calling my name. Only then did I unlock the door and go to the living room, my legs still weak. My father rushed in, looking around the house, asking where I was and if I had seen anyone. I started explaining everything at once, pointing toward the side door and trying to describe the sounds I had heard. My father went straight to the side door and opened it carefully. The rain had made everything dark outside, and the yard looked empty at first glance. Even so, he stood there for a few seconds, looking down at the ground. I saw his expression change when he pointed to the cement floor near the door. There were clear wet footprints leading from the side door toward the kitchen window. They weren't old marks scattered by the rain. They were recent and well-defined, as if someone had just passed through there before leaving. We went together to the kitchen, with him in front and me a few steps behind. The window was closed but unlocked, something my father was sure he hadn't left that way. Outside, the ground was more soaked and the footprints continued toward the fence where they disappeared into the wet soil. My father didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just took a deep breath and pulled out his phone to call the police. I leaned against the kitchen wall, staring at that window, trying to understand when someone had gotten that close without me noticing. The police arrived shortly after, with the rain still pouring heavily. They inspected the yard, the side door, and the kitchen window with flashlights, taking notes while my father explained what he had found. One of them commented that the footprints suggested someone had walked around the house testing different points, probably taking advantage of the storm to hide their sound and presence. They said there were no signs of forced entry, which meant the person didn't need to break anything to get close to the entrances. That gave me a tight feeling in my chest because it felt like the house hadn't offered any resistance at all. After they left, my father dried the kitchen floor and locked all the doors and windows, even the ones we never used to lock. The storm slowly passed, but I couldn't relax. I kept thinking about the doorbell ringing by itself, the firm knocks on the side door, and the wet footprints leading to the window. Everything had happened quickly, in less than an hour, but it felt like it had lasted much longer. To this day, whenever I hear a doorbell during a heavy rain, my body reacts before my mind does. I remember that afternoon and how someone had been out there, walking around the house while I was alone, trying not to make a single sound. Story 8. I was 11 years old when this happened, and I lived with my mother in a very typical residential neighborhood, the kind with similar houses and quiet streets. That afternoon, she left for work and said she would be back before it got dark. I would be alone for a few hours, something that had happened other times before. I came home from school, dropped my backpack on the couch, and went to my bedroom because it was hot and that was the coolest place in the house. The garage was attached to the house, with an internal door that opened into the hallway. Normally everything stayed locked, and I almost never paid attention to that area. I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom using my phone when I heard a noise coming from the garage. At first, I thought it was the garage door making some sound because of the wind or a car passing on the street. I ignored it. A few seconds later, I heard a male voice calling my name. It wasn't loud or aggressive. It was firm and clear, as if the person knew exactly who I was. He said my full name and said that my mother had asked for help, that I needed to go to the garage quickly. My entire body froze immediately, because no one besides my family usually called me that way. I stayed still for a few seconds, trying to understand if it could have been some kind of confusion. I thought maybe my mother had forgotten something and come back earlier, but I quickly dismissed that idea. I would have heard the car arriving, the garage door opening, the usual way she entered the house. The voice didn't sound rushed like hers would have been. It was far too calm. I slowly got up and went to my bedroom door without opening it. From the hallway, I could hear better. The man called my name again, this time saying it would only take a minute, that my mother had asked for help lifting something heavy in the garage. My heart started beating fast, and I felt that strange cold sensation in my stomach that comes right before real fear. I thought about responding just to say I couldn't, but something stopped me. The way he spoke sounded rehearsed, as if he had repeated that line before. I stood there listening. I didn't hear footsteps moving away, nor any sound of someone coming or going. It felt like he was standing there waiting for me to appear. Little by little, I realized that the internal garage door wasn't making any noise. That meant he was already inside. That was when I decided to lock myself in my bedroom. I locked the door slowly, trying not to make any noise, and stepped back a few steps. The room suddenly felt smaller. The fan made a constant humming sound that made me nervous, so I turned it off. In the silence, I could hear the garage better. I heard a low sound like someone handling something metal, maybe a shelf or a box being pushed. Then the voice came back, now closer to the internal garage door. He called my name again and said I didn't need to be afraid, that my mother really had asked. The calm way he spoke sent a chill through me. I grabbed my phone and texted my mother asking where she was. While I waited for a reply, I sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, trying to breathe slowly. I heard short footsteps going back and forth as if he were walking in a small space. I didn't hear the garage door open or close. It felt like he was just there, waiting for me to come out. I thought about calling someone, but I was afraid to make any sound. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. After a few minutes, I received a message from my mother saying she was still at work and hadn't asked for any help. That confirmed everything I was already feeling. My hands started shaking and I called her immediately, without worrying about whether the sound would give away where I was. I spoke quietly, almost whispering, saying there was a man in the garage calling my name and saying she had asked for help. Her tone changed instantly. She told me to stay locked in my bedroom and said she was calling the police while heading home. While I was talking to her, I heard something that made me freeze completely. The handle of the internal garage door was touched. It wasn't turned forcefully. It was just a slight movement, like someone testing whether it was unlocked. After that, silence. I didn't hear the door open or footsteps going away. That silence felt intentional, as if he had stopped to listen too. I sat on the floor staring at my bedroom door, expecting at any moment to hear someone approaching down the hallway. I stayed completely still, with the phone still to my ear, trying not to make any noise at all. The silence that followed the touch on the handle was worse than the voice. It felt like the house was holding its breath. I heard a low sound coming from the garage, like someone stepping back a few steps and then stopping. It didn't sound rushed. It sounded like someone deciding what to do next. With every second that passed, I thought he could simply open the door and walk down the hallway to my room. A few minutes later, I heard a different noise coming from outside. The garage door was moved, not fully opened, but enough to make that short metal creak. Right after that, I heard footsteps on the concrete floor of the garage going back and forth. My mother was talking to me on the phone, saying the police were already on their way and that I needed to stay locked in. I answered only with, "I'm here," afraid my voice would give away my location. My entire body was tense, as if I were waiting for something to happen at any second. After that, I didn't hear the man's voice anymore. What remained were small sounds, hard to identify, like something being touched and then released, light footsteps moving back and forth inside the garage. They weren't random noises, they had intention. At one point I heard something fall to the floor, a dull sound, followed by complete silence. I stared at my bedroom door, imagining it moving. My mind tried to come up with explanations, but none made sense. If he were lost, he would have left. If it were a mistake, he would have said something. He was just waiting. A few minutes later, I heard sirens in the distance. The sound was still far away, but it was enough for the noises in the garage to change. I heard quicker footsteps, followed by the clear sound of the garage door being opened fully. The light rain outside muffled part of the sound, but I could hear someone leaving in a hurry. I didn't hear a car start, just footsteps moving away. I stayed locked in my bedroom until I heard loud knocks on the front door and a voice identifying themselves as the police. Only then did I unlock the door, my legs weak, feeling relief mixed with fear. When the officers came in, they went straight to the garage. The door was open and there were marks on the floor as if someone had been standing there for a while. One of them pointed near the internal door and said it was clear someone had been waiting there, leaning, pacing in small circles. My mother arrived shortly after, crying, and hugged me tightly. That day, no one entered my bedroom except me. But knowing that someone had been that close, using my name, waiting for me to open the door, completely changed the way I felt about being alone inside my own home.
Thank you very much for your company until the end. Your support is what gives life to this channel. If these stories have caught you, don't forget to leave your like and comment on your opinion. And if you are not yet part of our community, sign up now to receive the next real horror stories.